Hey, sports fans, Coach Nick here, and before we get to the interview, I just wanted to reach out and make sure you knew how valuable ratings and reviews on iTunes are to the success of this pod. So if you enjoy these, head over there and let me know. I'd really appreciate it, and thanks for being in the conversation. Why did Jason Kidd get fired? Has a cloud been lifted from over the team? What has their new coach done to lead to better results? The only question left is, say it with me, you win? Hey sports fans, Coach Nick here, and welcome to the B-Ball Breakdown Podcast. I am pleased to welcome to the show today Matt Velazquez, who is the Bucks beat reporter for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. So I have the traditional Wisconsin greeting for you, Matt. Yeah, hey there.
Hey there.
Thank you for coming on the show. And, I figured we would talk a little bit about the past and what happened with Jason Kidd and perhaps a little bit what's going forward. So let's drag it in the mud. Let's get dirty right away here. Like what happened? How about this? What was the official reason for why they dismissed Jason Kidd?
I think the official reason was that they thought that they had a much more talented team than their record showed. I mean, at the time they were 23-22, and when you have Yanis and you have Chris Middleton, who is in the conversation to be an all-star, didn't make it this year, but he's a guy you have to talk about. And then you bring in Eric Bledsoe and Malcolm Brogdon's the rookie of the year last year. I mean, you have some guys, and especially when you look at the Eastern Conference, it seems like this team was talented enough to be competing for the 4 spot. That's where they want to be. That's what one of their goals is to be in the top half of the league, and they weren't there. And they felt that the best chance to get there would be to just have a change in leadership, change in direction, and just try and do something new. So that was the official reason. That's what they wanted to accomplish with that change. And so far they're 4-0 since Jason Kidd's left. Not, obviously their schedule helps.
Yeah.
But they have been playing better. They have looked better. They haven't necessarily looked super different. I'm sure we'll get into that. And then we'll have to see how Jabari Parker is when he gets back on Friday.
Okay, yeah. So hold all those thoughts because let's stay with this for 1 second. Your hair is very short in a way that you can keep your ear very low to the ground. How surprising was this when it actually happened, or did you hear whispers of this happening or when did the whispers start, or were they ever whispered until the day they fired him?
I was kind of surprised in the sense that I didn't think that they would pull the plug this soon. I thought that he would get to the end of the season, that they still had time. That's kind of the whenever you talk to Jason, especially he would point out, hey, like we're better than we were last year. We have the opportunity to improve. We still have time. You need to be playing your best basketball later, and we did that last year. That's what he would say. They won, I think, 13, 14 games in March of last year. So they still had time to kind of come together. And so it was a little surprising to me that right before a game on a Monday is when all this happened. It wasn't a surprise in the sense that it could happen. I mean, there had been kind of talk and a general understanding that he was one of the coaches in the league who was probably on one of the hotter seats. Just because they had that team that they thought that they could be much better than they were, and so I don't know. Like I said, it's just a function of I was surprised by the timing, not necessarily surprised by the result.
Right, I agree. Now, because we've been talking about this for probably a year and a half, and looking at the underachieving defense. The offense was funny because it was top 10. I think it's probably still top 10 now. But it was so frustrating from an aesthetic standpoint to watch what they were doing and how it wasn't really helping guys like Antetokounmpo. So, it's a kind of interesting thing. Now, when you say they fired him before the game, he must have been fired like in the morning, right? Like way before, or was this how quickly do you think that was that the decision was made that day?
No, it was an afternoon thing. I have my general understanding is that he had kind of an idea that it might be coming. And I know that the team, they said it happened pretty quickly. I generally think that wasn't like they lost to Philadelphia and then over the weekend they decided. It wasn't like they lost Saturday, Monday, he's gone. I think it's probably longer term than that, maybe like a week or so, that they'd kind of started thinking about it and kind of putting the wheels in motion. I mean, having the idea, and GM John Horst, it was his decision, and he had to run that by ownership, and they have a multi-person ownership group, so you have to get everybody on board, and that's always been their MO for that ownership group, is they have to do everything and be unanimous, or they won't make a decision. So you have to get everyone on the same page, figure out what your plan is, and draw that up. You can't just kind of wing it and say, oh, let's just fire him and we'll see what happens. It's like you have to have a coherent plan together. So the timeline is, it was after shoot-around, because he was at shoot-around that day as the coach. Nothing had been changed at that point, and then afterwards, that's when it started to get out. I think it was like 2 o'clock Central Time, or close to 3 o'clock Central Time. And during that time, he had gotten a call from Yanis that we've all heard about now through all the reporting that's happened, and Yanis has acknowledged that it happened. And that was the first time he had been told, even though he hadn't. I've heard that he kind of, like I said, he kind of knew that it was happening. It wasn't necessarily a shock to him when Yanis told him.
Okay.
But then when Yanis talked to him, it was when Jason was about to go meet with General Manager John Horst and President Peter Fagan. So that's what happened next, and then a couple hours later, they played a game.
Right. So it's funny because when you say it all happened quickly, part of me almost feels like they brought him in, they were talking to him, and whatever questions he was answering they didn't like, and they're like, you know what, we're just going to fire you. But obviously that's not the case as you describe it, because there needed to be a lot of voting going on and some agreement. But it sounds to me like they must have had the vote or whatever, like after the shoot around, right? Because that timing is interesting, where it's so tight. Where why would they have let him if they had voted already? It seems like that would be the minute you'd say you're gone, and then you fire him. But you know what I mean? Like, how would they have had the vote? They know he's gone, and then let him coach a shoot around. That seems weird to me.
Yeah, I don't know exactly when the vote took place, and I'm not sure necessarily how involved the shoot-around was or anything like that. Usually he doesn't talk at home shoot-arounds, so that's kind of, maybe neither here nor there, but that's a thing that, the media wouldn't have had access to him that day anyway. Mm-hmm. And by replacing him with assistant coach Joe Prunty, I mean, you still had the same, a familiar face in there, the same game plan, same strategy, that you'd already put together. You're not going to kind of be wasting whatever they went through in shoot-around. So, I'm not sure the TikTok minutes of when the vote took place, but it was probably, it could have been that day. It was a quick decision. I mean, not that it wasn't a well thought out decision, but it happened relatively quickly. Probably over the course of the week or a couple of days.
Well, we know that Yanis knew, I guess officially before, Jason Kidd officially knew. Does that mean that they asked Yanis if that was okay for them to do it? No, I mean, actually, they didn't do that, right? Because Yanis was upset.
No.
But, so I guess, either way, based on the answer, fill that in. I don't want to answer your question for you. What does that mean as far as the decision and how Yanis weighed in or didn't weigh in?
Well, I think, I talked to John Horst for an interview that I posted a couple of days afterwards, and he mentioned that it was in the context of they let go of assistant coach Frank Johnson, who had worked very closely with Jabari Parker, and Jabari was very close with him. Frank had just gotten brought in this year. He was Jason Kidd had played for the Phoenix Suns when Johnson was an assistant there, and and Kidd knew that Johnson was good with working with young players, so he became kind of the Jabari coach. And when I asked John Horst about that, do you take into account the feelings of a guy like Jabari Parker if you're letting go of the assistant coach who he's gotten close with? He's like, listen, this is a business. We're not going to take into account the one-off emotional, feelings of one player, whether it's Jabari or Malcolm Brogdon or Yanis. Like, we're not going to take those things into account if we think we're doing the right thing. Like, that's kind of the most important thing here. And so you kind of saw that in the Jason Kidd decision where, Yanis has said many times he's a very loyal guy, and Jason Kidd's been the longest tenured coach of his career, and he's helped him go from the player he was in his second year to the player he is now. I mean, he put the ball in his hands, he trusted him, he pushed him, he did a lot of things that Yanis believes were crucial and probably very well were crucial to him becoming an elite level player. And so obviously he feels attached to that coach. But at the end of the day, the Bucks as an organization didn't feel like Jason Kidd was the best coach for right now. Not that he wasn't helpful in the past or a positive influence in the past, but he wasn't the coach that they would need going forward. And, I talked to one of the co-owners, Wes Edens, that day, and I just said, how do you feel about these things that Yanis has reportedly said? Because at that point we hadn't been able to talk to Yanis to confirm them, and later on he did. I said, how do you feel about that? He's like, I think it's great that he feels that loyalty and he feels that emotion. He should feel that, and that's normal and that's natural. But but at the end of the day, he wants to win, and that's what that ownership group wants to do. That's what John Horst wants to do. The front office, everybody else in that building, they want to win. And so, if, winning is going to trump all those emotions, and if they can continue to keep winning like they have recently, then those things will blow over time.
Yeah, I mean, remember, winning will change a lot of things. And here's my other question then. If you're talking about on the court stuff, I did a video on what was going on, what I thought was going on, my issues. What's your take on the specific stuff about Jason Kidd as a head coach? And then we can get into communication as well, and not even the X's and O's. What about it really ended up being such a troubling thing for them specifically?
I think just their biggest issue was the inconsistency, that he couldn't get guys to run his system consistently enough and to be in the spots they needed to be. Especially you look at the defense. When he first put that defense in a couple of years ago, it was a top 5 in the NBA defense. Teams weren't used to – it might have been top 10, but it was up there for that first season he came in when they went from 15 wins to basically 500 and made the playoffs back in that 14-15 season. It was fairly high in terms of their defensive rating. But over time, teams adapted. That defense didn't adapt. But part of it was you would see the kind of what the Bucks were looking for and what that defense was designed to do. You would see it in fits and spurts. But then there'd be parts where guys would miss assignments or miscommunicate or just not give the effort that was necessary. And that's what Jason Kidd would always harp on. He's like, hey, this works if the guys play it and if they're playing hard. And he would always point to energy and effort and it not being there in the games where they struggled. And that might grate on players and grate on the front office if you just keep kind of throwing the blame back on them for not playing the system. But that's what he believed. He believed that if they played the system, if they played as hard as they could at all times, things would work out. And so that's kind of an issue on offense. I don't know if they necessarily had the creativity at all times to come up with ways to get guys open looks and open shots and to force the ball to move. Sometimes they would get stuck in certain sets that they really liked, and they would work for a little while, and then over the course of a couple games, they'd stop working as teams would watch the film, and they wouldn't have a backup, and then they kind of just revert to iso ball. So I think those things would probably hurt them.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that there was an over-reliance on a very specific set, the high post split, I call it, where they would enter the ball the high post and then they would screen in the corner. And they do have some nice wrinkles out of it, but it was sort of rote. It was very much like, I have to wait until you go, and now I must wait till there. And the ball never really moved while you're doing that. And if you're doing that, listen, if you do one set 25% of the time, that's a lot. And it was probably at least that amount of time because it was like, oh, there it is again. And I actually kind of respected that. Like, okay, like this is his thing. Like, so this is their sort of, and here's the thing, the high post split action is an action. It's not really an offense. And they kind of treated it like it was their triangle offense version. And I always found that fascinating. And again, I must stress, like this year, for instance, I mean, well, now it's a little bit skewed because of the last several games, but they were, I think, top 10 offensively. Right now, they're 10th offensively. They might have been 8th even when he got fired, as I remember it when I did the video.
Yeah, they could have been. I think a week ago, they might have even been seventh or 8th in offensive efficiency.
Yeah. And that happens to me a lot where I criticize an offense and I go check and I'm like, oh, they're very efficient. But again, you also can feast on a lot of bad teams. And so suddenly, if that's the case and you don't have the foundation isn't great, you have some, maybe inflated numbers. But, a lot of times you get a lot of the players saying the right thing, and certainly I believe Yanis sounded completely distraught and upset about the whole thing. Other players might have been saying, the very normal, I respected him, he was a good coach and whatever, I wish him well. You might have heard that. So, but I think the proof ends up being after he's gone and then you start hanging around the team a little bit like you have, is there a cloud that's been lifted? Do people seem a little bit happier just by maybe even the fact that he's not the head coach?
I don't know if I would say that, but because it's hard because have to remember that they've won 4 in a row. So I think they could just be happy that they're winning. But I think that one thing that Chris Middleton said recently kind of, stuck, where he was asked about what the difference is between a Jason Kidd team and a Joe Prunty team. And he mentioned that the team has been the team takes the shape of their coach. And he said that the Prunty's a kind of a more go with the flow guy. He picks you up, and that he helps create situations where the ball moves side to side and guys are playing together and guys are playing hard. And that's something that the guys have said, that Joe is just a super positive guy. And I think Malcolm Brogdon said, not that Jason Kidd wasn't positive, but they're different. And Jabari Parker too. He mentioned that Jason, he made sure to couch it in that one wasn't better than the other, but he did say that Jason came at it like a player, and so he'll get in your face like a player would. He's like, like Chris Middleton or John Henson, they'd get in your face. It doesn't matter who it is, but he would get in your face and kind of react differently, whereas Prunty has always been a coach. And so he kind of comes at it like a coach does and tries to build you up and does these different things. So you can kind of read into that how you want. I think there are definitely some things to read in there. But they're just a very different approach, and it's a different feel. And even though they might be running some of the same, you can't really change your scheme that much at this point in the season. I mean,
right.
Especially when you have the same coaching staff. I mean, you can't just. I mean, granted, they had 3 days off after Kidd was let go, but that's still not enough time to change everything. You need training camp, you need the offseason, you need time.
But by the way, if you're wondering why it happened then, that's as good a reason as any, is that they had 3 days off, and they're like, if we're going to do it anytime, because I'm sure they don't have 3 days off in a row. I mean, maybe the All-Star break, but that's about it.
Yeah, well, and then Yanis is going to be out for the All-Star break, and Malcolm Brogdon is going to be there at the Rising Stars. So you're not going to have your whole team together. Guys go on vacation. You're not going to have a ton of days of work together.
Yeah.
But yeah, having 3 days off in a row. I mean, granted, so he was fired on a Monday. Tuesday, because they had played a back-to-back, was a scheduled off day where they weren't going to have anything at all anyway. So they had, it wasn't a back-to-back, it was a Saturday, Monday, but they had scheduled with 3 days off to give the guys totally off on Tuesday.
Yeah.
So that was always planned, but still, at least you have 2 days, Wednesday and Thursday, to kind of get things going and let things kind of air out.
Now, I will be remiss because I kind of let that go as you're talking about the differences between Prunty and Kidd, because I think that there's probably a really provocative headline for my podcast somewhere in there as far as the comparisons. So you mentioned, so the feeling tends to be that Jason Kidd was probably more of in your face. I would probably say old school. I mean, it's kind of almost like he would have benefited from learning how to coach, right? From being like an assistant instead of just jumping from being a player to a head coach of an NBA team at the Nets and then all of a sudden to the Bucks. That is definitely one of those things where it kind of felt like there were some very strange coaching things that were going on that you wouldn't normally make. I pointed out in the video, there was the foul up by 4.
Oh, yeah.
There was the missed the intentional free throw up by 3. I mean, you watch them closely every day. Something tells me that even though those two things came up, to national prominence, there probably was more of those weird things happening over the last several years with him coaching, right?
Yeah, I mean, he had his. I mean, granted, it's my first year on the beat. I have watched them over the past couple of years. I probably was out there for 20 games a year, helping out Charles Gardner, who had been on the beat before me and then retired. But yeah, those things. Those weren't the only things. I'm sure of it. They weren't the only kind of ran things. I know that in the moment they seemed weird, with the fouling up 4, and I was the one who was like, hey, so what was the philosophy there? What's the plan? And he mentioned fouling up 4. He's like, oh well, they just wanted to drive and get quick 2s, and our guys didn't want to foul them, so they were just gonna get easy 2s. So I figured instead of letting them have easy 2s, I'd just foul them and make them shoot 2 free throws, and then it kind of exonerated them in the sense that they missed one of those free throws, and so it ended up working out. But it's still not a good plan.
Wait a minute. Actually, I read that and thought how dumb and that crazy that was. But you speaking it out loud, I had a moment wait a minute, right? Because they might miss. You can't. That's not the odds to play. But okay.
I know. Wow. If you do that every time, chances are pretty good that it's not going to work out. It's and you're still in a position of power, and you have the 4-point lead, and there's 30 seconds left. So it was not super likely to come back to bite them, but it made it more likely that they would fall into a bad situation.
Yeah, it's the only way to give the other team a chance at all is to stop the clock like that, and that's
stop the clock
that's the
and give them chances at high percentage points. But and then fouling up 3, it was like okay, or missing the free throw. There was like just a couple seconds left, like 1, 2, 3. I can't remember exactly, and he was like, all right, we're up 3, missed the free throw. I'd rather have them have to chuck it and possibly tie the game. Then he's like, I think he said in the moment, he's like, oh, knowing us, one of our guys might have fouled him on shooting a 3. It's like, well, then don't foul him shooting a 3.
Yeah. And by the way, LeBron didn't come that far off from making that shot, even though it's far.
No.
But that's not the idea is when there's like half a second left, right? Like
sure.
That's when you do that, maybe. But no, you never do it. Not when you're there. Not up by 3. It's like if you're
just make it.
Yeah, just make it. That doesn't make any sense. Anyway, but any other examples you want to give me while we're talking that are weird or no? Or nothing coming to your head?
Nothing's coming up from this season at least. But you're right. I mean, it's possible that he could have it could have helped him going from a player to being an assistant coach to kind of get mentored by a coach, and maybe that was what he thought, or maybe that's what he thought he was doing during the later stages of his career. Where he wasn't necessarily playing as much. Maybe he was kind of collecting information and building towards his second career. I don't know that. But you look at some of the situations that came up and you think, oh, it might have helped to
by the way,
kind of help.
Yeah, and look at Steve Kerr. Like, he's a player. He never coached before, and look what he's doing. He's had a lot more time to sort of be out and look, and he did his research. So he had apprenticeships, basically, as an assistant, basically, without actually sitting on a bench every night with a team. But, there are examples, I suppose, of that a little bit, but it definitely feels like in Jason Kidd's instance, it should have been, or he probably would have helped him, I think. Now let's talk about
Kerr. Yeah, Kerr worked in a front office. He was a broadcaster. Like he took that time to kind of you're dealing with coaches. You may not be on the bench with them, but you're dealing with coaches. You're talking to coaches. You're learning more about the game, and you're watching a lot of games. And not that Jason didn't do any of those things. But
what do you think about this?
It's a different situation.
Do you think that the players, was there any issue the fact that I don't think he ever drew up a play on a clipboard? That was Prunty the whole time, right? So was that ever a thing?
No, he drew up some plays.
He did?
There were some times where he'd draw them up. It wasn't always Prunty, but I remember there would be huddles where they'd come in and he'd have stuff on the board. But there was a lot of Prunty. I mean, the way that they split it up was that Prunty was in charge of the offense, Sean Sweeney's in charge of the defense, and they kind of huddled together and then they were able to present it to the players. But I think that there were times he drew things up for sure.
Oh, okay. Good. I mean, whenever I saw it, obviously, if you're not there, you only see what the TV shows you. It seemed like Prunty was always up in front and center a lot of the time, at least. And certainly, to me, it seems like if the head coach should probably be the only guy to do that. I mean, otherwise, the players might not think you know what you're talking about, right? Like, or your Randy Wittman. Did you ever see that clip of Randy Wittman? When he couldn't get the clipboard the right way he wanted it, and he kept flipping it upside down. And by the way, I don't blame him. I think I've heard that certain players, in the way they visually process, have to have the board a certain way. They can't flip it and see it the other way. And it's possible just to defend Wittman for a second that maybe he couldn't remember exactly how one of his players needed it, and then he got frustrated and he got whatever. But either way, that was a bad look. The last four games they've won against the Suns, it was a close game, but again, it had been tumultuous, having just been losing their head coach. They blew out the Nets.
And Yanis didn't play.
Oh, and
so when Yanis doesn't play, that, and Malcolm Brogdon didn't. Oh no, he did play that game. He scored a career high. But Yanis didn't play. So
that's another reason. So then they go and they blow out the Nets. They blow out the Bulls. They beat the Sixers handily. Those are all, it's not like they're eking these out and barely winning and somehow at the end. Like, that's probably what they're supposed to be doing, right? That's what the ownership probably envisioned. Maybe they don't beat the Cavs, maybe they don't beat the Rockets, but they should handily beat the Nets and the Bulls, and that's what they did. What's happening? Did they change the lineup thing? What do you see on the court now?
I think that the guys are definitely buying in, especially on both ends, really. I mean, you look at their offense, they had like 2 straight games of 28 assists. They had 21.5 against Chicago. The ball is moving. Before they would get into periods where things might get difficult and the ball wouldn't move. and you could see it. You could see, like, Yanis would take his turn to do a couple ISOs. Middleton would take his turn. Bledsoe would take his turn. And if those guys weren't getting positive results off those ISOs, they'd probably lose because they would fall into that habit, especially in the fourth quarter. But in recent games, they've really kept the ball moving. They've tried to vary up a few different sets and open things up. On defense, guys they know what position they're supposed to be in. They've stopped being as aggressive in terms of their trapping. They've been a little bit more conservative with the way that they've played things, and that's worked out pretty well. I mean, it helped that all three of those teams, I'm pretty sure, didn't shoot well from three. I know Philly was like 2 of 26 from three. Not all of them were contested. A lot of them were. But they missed a couple open ones, or a lot of open ones. And so generally they've just kind of had that buy-in. The lineup hasn't changed that drastically. We've seen a little bit more Jason Terry, just kind of giving some vet energy off the bench, making a couple shots. Malcolm Brogdon's been out a couple games with a calf injury. Eric Bledsoe's going to be out tonight against the Timberwolves. So they've had some kind of moving pieces, but everybody who's come in has been confident and been able to contribute at the level that the Bucks would hope. So, and you mentioned them handily taking care of teams. That's something that they really hadn't done. I mean, most of the season, they didn't really put teams away. I mean, they got beat by 30 by Dallas. I mean, they've played some of the highest percentage of close games in the NBA this season, because no matter what would happen, either they'd be up by a lot or down by a lot, they'd somehow find a way to equal it out in the fourth quarter, and not really be able to put teams away. So for them to be able to do that multiple games in a row has been a positive sign, and something that they've struggled with not just this year, but the past couple of years as well.
Okay, let's talk about three-point percentage defense, because I'm curious. Are you aware of what it was or what it is overall for the whole season?
I know it was really bad.
22nd.
That's much better than what it was.
Yeah. Well, okay. Oh, okay. It's 22nd overall, because now I want to say they're number one in three-point percentage defense. Again, tiny sample size. I'm sorry, over the 4 games since they left. Again, tiny sample size against some certain teams, but their defensive rating overall is 24th, and now it's in the last 4 games it's 3rd. So again, something to look for at least. I'm gonna have to dig into the footage to see if there's any tangible evidence of better defensive stuff. But certainly, yes, the trying to trap the pick and roll way too often was giving up short rolls, or they give up wide open threes, which is what you don't want to do in this league. Maybe you would want to do that in 2011. And that's the other issue you have is Jason Kidd is a product of the 90s. The 90s is a kind of a dangerous era for coaching, if you believe it or not. Whenever I reference old fundamentals that are not applicable anymore, I usually reference the 90s coach, primarily because the 90s is when all those years of, from 1940 to 1990, all they built up all this information they thought was rock solid ends up sort of not being right. And back, the threes weren't taken, and the way they rotated on defense. So anyway, so that's what I'm noticing, and it's certainly a huge trend in a good direction defensively. I'm sorry, did you say are they playing harder defensively? Did you feel like you mentioned the ball moving more? Is there more energy on defense as well?
I think there is. I think there's definitely better communication. I think they've made an emphasis since Prunty's been around to ensure that guys know exactly where they're supposed to be and what they're supposed to be doing. Not that it wasn't important before, but that's one thing that Prunty has mentioned. Hey, we need to communicate first and foremost, and then we need to be in the right spots. That's when you ask him about the defense and what's wrong with it. That's the first thing he went to, was that guys need to be in the right spots. And then maybe they hadn't been in the right spots, or inconsistently had done that, where one possession everybody does it perfectly, the next possession everybody's whatever. And so they need to really hone in on that and being where they need to be. But yeah, they've definitely seemed more cohesive at that end, and less aggressive, less uselessly aggressive. They're being aggressive in the right spots, but they're not wasting energy and effort, being aggressive in spots that are actually going to hurt them.
For sure. Well, listen, Matt, this was an amazing podcast. A lot of great information here about what happened and why and where they're going and looking forward. Do you have any predictions as we move along here to the rest of the season and what the Bucks are going to do as far as record and seeding and everything?
Well, before the season, I think I projected them at being a 47-win team. I think that was my official projection for the newspaper. I think they have every opportunity to get to that point. I think that they should be in contention for the 4th spot in the East, especially with Jabari Parker coming back. Just from what I've seen of him at practices, he looks very good. He looks just like the Jabari
Really?
but before he got hurt last year. I mean, he's throwing up crazy dunks. He's still got his quick first step. He looks confident on his knee. He's had plenty. He was ahead of schedule in his rehab, but they, wanted to take things step by step and slowly and be careful. That's kind of what he wanted to do, especially. He didn't want to cut any corners. And so they spent the last 6 weeks really working on his conditioning, giving him as much game-type action in practice with the Bucks and the Wisconsin Herd as possible. So he's been able to test that. And obviously, he's going to have some adjustment when he comes back. But he could really make a big difference for them in terms of adding depth and another scorer. And, I mean, if you always have one or two of Yanis, Middleton, Bledsoe, and Parker on the court, I mean, you could eat up some second units with those guys and spread the minutes out, especially with Yanis and Middleton playing near the top of the NBA in minutes. So I think that the floor should be the 5 seed for them. They have the talent, they have the ability, and they're currently healthy enough to make that move relative to some other Eastern Conference teams. So I guess that would be my prediction is that the anything lower than the 5 would be, kind of a letdown.
For sure. And that, I agree. It looks like that way exactly right now. I mean, if they were to win, they're at 55% of the winning percentage right now, which would get them to 45 wins, which is your prediction, which seems very reasonable and maybe even higher. And I tell you, the Cavs would be a little bit concerned about having to play them in the playoffs. I feel like Giannis could be a thing where they would have, if they could figure out a way to force LeBron to have to guard him, then I just want that as a sort of a fan. I want to see Giannis and LeBron have to go against each other, LeBron on defense. And I think that would be a really exciting series that could go quite long.
Oh, yeah, that'd be incredibly fun. It'd be something that I think every NBA fan would love to see, whether it's a first-round series or a second-round series. Let's just make it happen.
Yeah, and then we just got to make it sure that, because they here's the secret is they hide LeBron, right? They don't usually let him guard those good players. But if we can figure it out, you got to guard Giannis. A couple of times last year, I think it was, where Giannis backed him down in the post and he had to foul him. And I could just remember the look on LeBron's face. No disrespect to LeBron. I just love the young upstart, underdog, taking it to the guy. And LeBron was like, "What? You can't do that. You can't back me down in the post, and then and you're calling a foul on me." It was great, and I want to see I want to see how he reacts and more of that. So, Matt, you'll have to come back on the show. We'll have to check back in and see how accurate this was as we get later on in the season.
Yeah, sounds great. Just keep me posted. All
right, cool. Well, thank you for coming on the show and joining us. And don't forget, sports fans, at B-Ball Breakdown, we're not a channel, we're a conversation. You in? Are you in, Matt?
Oh, I'm in.